Welcome to the UKRI TAS seminar for today. We are lucky today to have Dr. Stuart Middleton and Dr. Elena Nichele, who will be talking to us on SafeSpacesNLP, exploring behavior classification around online mental health conversations from a multidisciplinary context, NLP, applied linguistics, social science, and human in the loop AI. So it will be I expect it to be a very interesting talk. And without further ado, I let the speakers take the floor. Welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just share my slides.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart.
Let me just make it bigger. Okay, can you see that as full screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Okay, switch off my camera then now.
Just juggle my windows a little bit so I can see what's going on. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so thank you very much. So yeah, today I'd like to give with Elena a seminar on the SafeSpacesNLP project. So this project is focusing on behaviour classification within the context of online mental health conversations. And as you'll see, it's very much a multidisciplinary project. So I'll cover some kind of spend about half the time covering the computer science part. So that's the natural language processing and the human in the loop AI. And Elena will cover the sort of applied linguistics and social science side, and then we'll make sure we leave some time for questions. So the basic structure is, so we'll just do a quick overview of the speakers, and then I'll basically present a little bit of background around behaviour classification and human in loop NLP, what the current research is, so you have a good understanding. Then we'll do some specifics around safe spaces itself and what we're doing. And then I'll try and highlight some of the computer science challenges that we're finding as we do the project. And then Elena will do exactly the same sort of structure for the SocioBehavioral Analysis. Yeah, brilliant. So myself, I'm an associate professor at the University of Southampton. My research interests are natural language processing, and my sort of specialty is information extraction, and particularly socio-technical NLP. So that's kind of humans and NLP models working together. And a lot of my projects are multidisciplinary. My active grants sort of represent that. I have NERC funding, ESRC funding, and Safe Spaces, which is a UKRI TAS hub funded project. Elena?
And I'm Elena Nichele. I'm a research fellow at the University of Nottingham. My background is cross-disciplinary. My background is in applied linguistics and marketing, and my research interests are also cross-disciplinary. I'm interested broadly in communication and the impact of language on marketing and vice versa, especially through the aid of technologies. And last but not least, I'm also a very proud PhD Lancaster graduate, so it's a special pleasure for me to be here today.
Brilliant. Okay, so Safe Spaces itself, the project. So as I say, it's a TAS funded project. It's a one-year project. So we've been running for a little while. We're due to finish in August, although we're hoping to get some follow-on funding to kind of do some technology transfer to our stakeholder, who is COOF. So COOF are the UK's leading mental health forum provider for young people. So they have people around sort of teenagers up to early adults. And what they provide is a kind of online space where people with mental health problems can kind of self-register, join sort of discussion forums where they're match made with people with similar problems, so they can talk, have a bit of peer discussions. And there's always a COOF moderator or a counsellor within that online space to kind of moderate the conversations, and also provide interventions where they seem necessary to sort of help the young people, point them to some resources which may make positive interventions for their particular problems. Okay, so the sorts of things that they talk about are things like depression, self-harm, gender identity issues, things like that. So COOF themselves are able to, within the project, share all of their sort of 10-year archive of online posts, and they can do that because users register. They have like an opt-in for research. So this is only a subset of all of the conversations, but we have about 200,000 posts data set to work with, so a substantial data set in which to experiment on. Within the project itself, we're developing graph-based natural language processing for automatic text classification of the behaviour markers within conversations which will lead to mental health outcomes. We also want to explore kind of human in the loop approaches, so active learning, adversarial training, and I've got some details on that in the slides to come. And then as part of the social behaviour analysis, we're doing things like interviewing, looking at data coding, linguistic analysis of that COOF data set, and also looking at some experiments around trust in the sort of AI to help. So very much interdisciplinary. We have computer science and applied linguistics represented today. We also have my another co-I who's a associate professor in criminology as well, helping us. And very, very importantly, we have a couple of representatives from COOF who are active and are helping us co-design and trust the trust experiments. So they are very good partners. So computer science side, so the behaviour classification and the human in the loop NLP. So typically the sort of research that's out there today. So a lot of the research is around hate speech. So you have workshops like the online abuse and harms, the WOA workshop. There's some web links there, but also you have some mental health specific workshops in the NLP area. So these are things like the social media mining workshop for health. There's a link there. They're looking at depression, drug use, things like that. And the workshop that we've been engaging with for Safe Spaces, which is the computational linguistics and clinical psychology workshop, CL-Psych. They're looking at a range of different mental health problem areas like depression, suicide, self-harm, things like that. The web links are on there. There's also worth a mention the SemEval series. They have a whole load of different shared tasks every year for different natural language processing tasks. The of interest is the 2019 focus. There was a focus on hate speech and emotion detection, which is relevant as well. So lots of data sets. I just want to give you a quick sort of sample of what's out there. So you can see there, these are data sets around hate speech, which are commonly used as benchmark data sets within academic works. Things to note, there's a lot of tweets there. There's a lot of kind of Wikipedia articles. Obviously, the data, which is easier to get, tends to get annotated. But also of note is the look at the labels. So hate speech, generally the state-of-the-art research, there is no common standard on the annotation, the labeling, which is applied. So every single paper kind of has their own particular angle, like Wazim was looking at sexism, racism. There's Vidgen was looking at the East Asian prejudice, so counter speech, things like that. They're all different label sets, so it makes it quite hard to kind of use the data sets together. There's some more. Interestingly, the hate speech tends to be focused on sort of single posts, even with the Reddits, they're all kind of single posts, they're not really long conversations. But as we move to kind of emotion detection, that's kind of still pretty much single post, but we're getting a few more labels. So there's between 5 and 8 labels is a typical sort of stuff that you will get from a data set there. And you can see sort of the numbers. They tend to focus on things like online conversations a little bit more. And then for the mental health data sets with actual labels around things like depression, suicide, risk, online grooming, things like that, they tend to be slightly longer in a more focus on conversational sessions. Therefore, they tend to be from sources like Reddit, online posts, and they're using things like the online forum thread to give them as a proxy for the label. So if you look at the CL-Psych 2019 dataset, that was focusing on suicide risk. They used the subreddit, which is Suicide Watch, and they used that subreddit as a proxy for the label. And I think they mixed in other Reddits which were not suicide rich to give them a 50-50 sort of split. So from a behavior classification point of view, there's kind of 2 types of data sets that we need to think about. There's the short conversations. These are like the hate speech type thing, where there's no real temporal context. It's kind of single post from a speaker, maybe a dialogue with 2 or 3 conversation turns and just 2 speakers. Okay, so the complex behavior and key moments are not really explicitly represented there. You don't have a lot to go on when you're training your models. Whereas for the longer conversation classification, there is a good body of work within the NLP community, but it tends to be based on conversational NLP and sort of dialogue. So things like transcripts of telephone conversations. They have transcripts of air traffic control systems, which are annotated, and published to the Linguistic Data Consortia data sets, but they don't tend to be focused on the mental health area. So generally speaking, the temporal context has not really been well studied within this area, and there is most of the approaches that you see to date have kind of just concatenate all the posts together in a conversation as one big document, shove it into a transformer model, which obviously has the limited token space, the 512, so the token limit, and that's kind of variants of that is very much the state of the art. So as you get larger conversations and the number of words within the conversation grow and the number of speakers interacting goes beyond 2, it becomes more challenging. So a little bit overview of the technology space that we're working in. So for longer conversations, which is our focus for Safe Spaces, the typical approaches will be around augmented transformer models, multitask learning, and bioencoder models. So I've got some kind of little workflows there to give you an example what they are. So the augmented transformer, essentially you have two transformers. It doesn't have to be a transformer. We've got another one where there's an IR model, but the first model will essentially summarize or filter the keywords within the actual input, which is like utterances or sentence of text. And then the output of that first transformer model will feed into either like a transformer will actually do the model which does the task. So in these two examples we've got from the papers, we've got the second transformer at the top is doing text generation. That's the transform model. And the middle one is an information retrieval, IR model. And they are doing essentially using keywords that the first transformer finds to do search and look up from Wikipedia to then return the matching entity of relevance to what's being talked about. The other approach, which is quite common, is multitask learning. So here we've got an example of a paper which is using kind of emotion, empathy, and rationale-based data sets. But essentially, you can have a number of data sets. You could have sentiment, emotion, maybe specific mental health topics like suicide risk. Some of those data sets that we saw, and the model is trained on all of them, and then you have transfer learning. So your target task, which you may or may not have labels for, can actually be trained, and then you fine-tune on that target task. Okay. So for the human in the loop approach, so those are models, that's typically what the sorts of models that we would be using are. To bring the human into the loop, there's two main sort of approaches. The first is to do interactive sense making, where you kind of have the model and a team of humans work with the model in a kind of cyclic fashion to try to get the most out of it. The second is around sort of adversarial training and sort of active learning, where the humans are actually used to annotate the models and the models can be retrained. So in the first case, we've got examples, some papers up there. If we take my one, which is the Middleton 2020, that was based on the FloraGuard project. So we're working with Kew Gardens and so conservation scientists in the team looking at the illegal wildlife trade online. So people but talking about buying and selling plants where it's against the CITES listing, which is illegal in certain situations. So what we did was we had a team, we had the conservation scientists and the computer scientists sort of in there running the models. We would run the models to crawl some of the online forums, classify the results, identify potential sellers, potential buyers, the types of plants that are being traded, the types of locations being talked about. And then that intelligence package, the output of the model, would be provided, visualized for a user. That's why it's interactive sense making. And the user would be a conservation scientist. They would then use that intelligence to look at maybe the online post, filter out the noisy cases, the ones which are not relevant, focus in on the maybe target vendors of interest, and maybe expand the list. And then you go around in a cycle. You retrain, you recrawl, run the model again, and eventually you kind of evolve an intelligence product which is then usable for, in our case, we had UK Border Force in the project. The second approach, which is the kind of active learning, adversarial learning, that's where so for active learning, the model itself will suggest posts where it doesn't have a label for, but it's uncertain. So maybe the post, it's all of the classes that it's trying to classify are all kind of similar confidence. It really doesn't know. Those posts are presented to the user in a cycle and are essentially to be annotated. So the user would then say, okay, these are difficult, tricky, ambiguous posts. The user will annotate those to a sample budget, however many hours of work they're prepared to put in for a particular cycle. Then the model will be retrained and the process goes around. So after a few loops, essentially what you're doing, you are training and retraining your model to get better on the difficult cases. Now, the adversarial training is the same idea, except rather than the model suggest the posts, the human will try to break the model, challenge, come up with some new posts, new inputs, which actually cause problems for the model. And if they manage to succeed, they will take those examples, annotate them, retrain, and then see if the model does better the next time. So it's ways to kind of iteratively improve the model with the actual stakeholders, which can be computer scientists, conservation scientists, but it can also be stakeholders, which is what we're looking at in Safe Spaces. And that comes to the project. So the project itself, we're looking at kind of two phases. The phase we're in at the moment is the CL Psych shared task. So this is literally next week, we'll be submitting our entry. Okay, we're working hard for that. So the data set is it's a mental health data set. It's one of the standard ones. It's based on things like Reddit posts, and they've been annotated in terms of the kind of the mood of the user and the potential risk in terms of the mental health of changes of that mood over time. Okay, so we have conversations and we're trying to classify the mood. So the first task is looking at post-level classification. So looking at within a series of sequence of conversational posts, which post is the point where the mood changes? What's the moment of change in terms of the mood? And then task B is looking at the same idea, but at a user level. So given a set of conversations and changes in mood, can we identify that user is in a risk category? And that can be tricky because if their mood kind of gets worse, but then it gets better, you know, it's not just about looking at the endpoint. So the models for the computer scientists in the audience, the models we're looking at are, we're looking at ROBERT, so it's standard word embedding. So we're trying 3 different approaches, fairly sort of basic approaches, which you'll see will advance more later on. We're going to aggregate all the posts together in the conversation, send them off to our word embedding. We're using ROBERT to do that, and then train a multi-layer perceptron for a classifier. The second approach is trying to bring in more of that sequential nature of the conversation. So here we're going to take individual posts, sort of one by one, in the order that they appear in the temporal order of the conversation. Embed again using ROBERT, but this time create a sentence embedding from those word embeddings and train a BioSDM model so it has a notion of the sequence. And then the third is the same again, but this time we're bringing in a kind of multitask angle. And we're going to do that, we're going to use ROBERT and Deep Emoji. So Deep Emoji is another pre-trained embedding, but this time it's an embedding trained to kind of predict the emoji that's within the post. It's trained on millions and millions of documents crawled from the web. So it's a way to kind of encode patterns around emotion and a little bit of sentiment, I guess, as well. So that way we'll basically do a shared BioSDM encoder and use a multitask formulation. Okay, so that's what we're doing right now. In the next couple of months, we'll then move to kind of develop a new model. We want to bring in a graph augmented natural language processing model, again, with the idea to encode the structure of the conversations. What we're going to focus again is classifying moments of change, but this time we're going to use annotations from our COOF dataset. And Elena's got some details of how we'll annotate that. But essentially,
Yes.
we want to have models which can provide a kind of early warning for our COOF moderators. So we want to try and identify those moments of change early enough that the moderators can maybe triage their daily intake of posts and identify the ones which are time critical or worthy of quick intervention and try to spot that so that those interventions can happen as early as possible. We've also got a couple of interns running over the summer, which will look at our active learning and adversarial training. So for the Southampton intern, we're looking to look at active learning, and this will be a case of kind of taking our models and trying to look at how having stakeholders, so COOF in our case, within the team training the models, how they can develop trust in those models over time. And for the Nottingham intern, they'll do a similar thing, but looking at this time from the data point of view, so mental health trajectories from data. And for that one, COOF is actually hosting the intern as well, sort of virtual hosting. Yep. So ideas of can we build better models through co-training? A little shout out to a paper I've just published on AI and trust. So that one's there. Okay, so little take homes from the computer science point of view with regards to challenges. So for behavior classification, what we're seeing is that very much the temporal context is important for classifying behavior. And the sorts of challenges are how can we best encode and embed those conversations into long conversation graphs, and what are the differences that we need to factor in for fast and slow paced moments of change? And then can we constrain our models, our deep learning models for NLP, can we constrain them to force them to learn more human understandable concepts? For example, if we were to provide an explanation alongside the data, can we actually guide the patterns which are learned to be more sort of human understandable and therefore potentially more trustworthy? For the human in the loop NLP, very much these are human teams with domain experts, computer scientists, social scientists, and of course the AI models. So the sorts of challenges are around sort of how can we get the best out of that mix, that multidisciplinary mix and team. And for example, if we have the computer science AI experts in the team, we can actually change that model. Even don't change. We don't need to just change the data. We can change the model itself. That's quite interesting. You know, can we change the model on the fly? There's lots of different things that we could do. So there's some big challenges about how to get the best out of those socio-technical setups. There is an issue with the community. There's a lot of papers on human in loop, but they all do different things. They evaluate their systems in different ways. There's quantitative evaluation, qualitative evaluation, mixtures. It's very hard to compare across approaches and know which ones are best. And also the data, by its nature, we're talking human annotation, so the data samples tend to be quite small. And there's an issue, you know, is this going to introduce bias in itself? is the effect of any human error actually going to be magnified because it's such a small sample? Okay, and then lastly, yeah, we're interested in the how do we develop trust in the AI? Can these socio-technical approaches, where particularly the stakeholders are in the team, are they going to learn how when the model is strong, when it is weak? Is that an effective mechanism to develop trust in the actual model at the end of the session? And will that enable sort of pathways to have the models exploited? Okay, and now I'd like to hand over to Elena, and she's going to give a little bit about socio-behavioral analysis.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stuart. So to give you a little bit of background, I've summarized the overview on which our research project and this particular part was grounded. First, it is important to remember that digital tools allow mental health service providers like the one we focus on to scale up services and maximize affordances while maintaining anonymity of the users. Then we also need to remember that online platforms and digital means allow mental health service providers like the one we are focusing on to improve their scale and thus provide better mental health support to the users. Finally, the digital technologies that they typically use offer several benefits to the users, including information access at their own pace, and they empower the users because they give them access to supportive relationship in a moment of need, not only through the professionals, but also through the peer who are also on the online community. Next.
Yeah, just say next slide.
Sorry. Oh, no, the one before? Cool.
There we go.
Perfect, thank you. And then it is also important to remember that digital technologies allow for higher engagement and to maximize reach, reaching even those that are traditionally defined as hard to reach for a variety of reasons. From the perspective of the users, it also allows them to respect their communication preferences, seeking for support online if they believe online support is best for them, and to seek support whenever they think they need it. And this makes them motivated to choose support. And this changes a little bit the relationship that happens there, and it influences it, obviously. Finally, the literature also tells us that digital platforms in health settings can be defined successful because of some sociocultural factors. In particular, they allow to establish and develop an altered expert-client relationship, and they also allow to establish and maintain an altered public-professional relationship because of the online environment where they happen. In this online environment, the boundaries between the professionals and the users are blurred, and that's what determines and influences their relationship, which is altered. And this is something that will be discussed more in the rest of the presentation, as you will see. But for now, let's move on and let's focus on the methodologies. Okay, so talking about methodologies, can you go back one slide, please?
Sorry, my keyboard is playing up. I'll do my best to fix it.
Current research into socio-behavioral analysis for mental health includes a wide variety of methodologies. This is the case because, as you probably can imagine, this topic implies the combination between, well, broadly speaking, two disciplines, sociology and medicine, first of all. And so because of its cross-disciplinarity and because of its complexity, which is inherent into this topic, the methodologies can vary greatly, and they can comprise both qualitative and quantitative methodologies, often in combination to overcome the limitation that each one of these methodologies can carry. For example, as you might know, qualitative research can be subjective to subjective interpretation, or it can lack generalizability, while quantitative research can carry some challenges in terms of sampling, for example, making the sample representative, or in terms of variance. Next. Okay, so without any further ado, let's take a look at how our analysis was set up. As Stuart was saying, we focus on CUF, which is an organization that provides free online confidential service, offering counseling and emotional well-being support to young users in the UK through a digital platform and through a wide variety of materials. So what did we wanted to find out from this part of the project? We wanted to find out the type of data that was included in CUF forums, especially from a linguistic perspective. And therefore, we thought that adopting a qualitative perspective for this particular part of the project could be particularly helpful. We decided to interview key actors, and we interviewed 6 moderators, 3 counselors, and 3 clinical leads, who are basically the coordinators and supervisors of the support provided. And we we collected this interview data and we analyzed it. We got inspired by an existing coding schema, which is the QMUL coding schema, which aims at the automatic detection of changes in mood and individual behavior, as Stuart was saying earlier. And our deriving scheme is the one you can see on the next slide. Okay, perfect. So this is the coding scheme we designed and adopted for the annotation of the data set. As you see, it includes several codes: the actor, the work, the platform, risk behaviors, and other elements that also impacted the data that we were analyzing. And each one of these codes also included some subcodes. For example, the authors provided some self-definitions of their professional role. They refer to their previous experience as shaping their role professionally. They refer to their background, to the tasks that they carried out in their professional life, the challenges that they faced, the training they received, and the support they received from the other professionals as shaping how they were performing their professional role. And so all of these we could see in the interview data. Okay, let's move on. So this is the meaty part of the presentation. Our key results can be subdivided under these 3 main areas. So first of all, by analyzing the interview data, we were able to see that the experience and the training that the moderators and counselors had received really shaped their roles, their professional roles, and their ability to support young users struggling with mental health. We also were able to find out that risks were particularly important and key to understand for us if we wanted to understand the role of the CUF professionals and as a result, the forum data that we were analyzing, because professionals within CUF had to be able to quickly identify the risks pointed out by users, signposting the users to additional help if needed, especially if the situation was life-threatening, as you can imagine. Finally, another important area that we were able to explore to this analysis of the interview data we collected was the one of the challenges. Challenges were of several types. For example, they involve the efficiency with which moderators and counselors had to perform their tasks, their professional tasks, and they had to provide support to the users. Again, because users might have been dealing with particularly risky behaviors and mental health struggles. And so they needed to provide prompt mental health support to them. Also, there were some challenges that were more to deal with the interpretation of the messages these moderators and counselors received. So, for example, some users might have been using some local jargon that they needed to be able to understand what these users were struggling with, or what they needed support with, or what type of support they were looking for, and how they prefer to be helped. Also, there were some challenges, for example, in terms of location. So again, local jargon, but also local constraints, for example, in terms of the support available to the users according to their location. And so these are our key results. And we are currently in the process of developing a paper that includes our analysis of the interview data, and hopefully that will be out soon. So we'll be happy to pinpoint you to that when it's out. Okay, so now that we have been focusing on results, what are our future directions on the basis of what we found and how we want to continue with the rest of the project? Our project partner, CUF, has made available forum data to us, which include posts and messages, both moderated and unmoderated, to which Stuart was alluding earlier. We are in the process of deciding how we are going to annotate this data, as he was saying, and we are also in the process of designing the experiments that we want to plan to identify the frequent topics and themes and pinpoint the challenges that professionals are dealing with when supporting young users struggling with mental health, and possible solutions, and especially, obviously, how we can support professionals potentially in performing their role more efficiently or more effectively. Next, please. Okay, so let's now conclude by discussing some of the challenges that you might remember from what I've discussed previously. As you might imagine, the challenges that the professionals face in their professional roles have had an impact on what we experience as researchers involved in this project. So from our perspective as researchers involved in this project, these are some of the key challenges we had to take into consideration and keep in mind when carrying out the project. First of all, what I was mentioning earlier, so the blurred line, the blurred boundaries between professionals and users have played a role in how not only on the professionals that we were interviewing, but also in the data that we were analyzing. And it was something that we had to keep in close consideration while analyzing the data to be able to understand the data fully. We also had to keep in mind that the professionals we were interviewing were providing effective, highly emotional and immaterial labor, and that they were trying to facilitate a very challenging information flow because they were often supporting marginalized subjects who were facing social and health exclusion. The topics they were sharing and discussing with the professionals, but also with the peers, as I said earlier, are often highly stigmatized, and this added a layer of complexity also for us as researchers. And then we also had to keep in mind that professionals we were interviewing had to maintain the authority and be perceived as authentic, and try to create and maintain trust with the users. they had to establish and maintain trust with the users for the users to be able to feel confident and to share with them what they needed support with, obviously. And finally, we also had to keep into close consideration the key role of training for professionals to provide support, the working conditions they were working in, which were highly challenging, as you probably can imagine from what I've shared now, and also the highly toxic content they were facing with on a daily basis in their professional roles, which also reflected on us as researchers involved in this project.
Okay, thank you, Elena. So
Pleasure.
just want to bring it together really in a single slide at the end, and then we can take some questions. So we've covered today the SafeSpacesNLP project. So this is a one-year project looking at behaviour classification NLP in this socio-technical setting, working with COOF, which is the UK's largest mental health forum provider. So a very large data set, looking at trying to identify risk markers and indicators for potential mental health problems within conversations. The models we're focusing on graph-based NLP, human-in-the-loop natural language processing, and also socio-behavioral analysis in a kind of multidisciplinary environment. So the key challenges for take-homes, the behaviour classification, the challenges are really around the temporal context, trying how to best encode that, and how to train and force the models to encode more human understandable patterns, such that they can then be maybe trusted more by the end users and stakeholders. For the human in the loop NLP approach, you've got to bear in mind that it's quite hard to evaluate those approaches, so it's hard to compare the different papers out there for different approaches, and also you have to bear in mind that potentially human error can be magnified. So the small sample set which is being annotated can often produce quite a big bias to the result. From the social science point of view, so the digital intermediaries and vulnerable publics that we're dealing with, so things like I have to be mindful of the blurred lines when you have these online environments between the users, the kind of people with mental health problems that are participating, and also the professionals, so the moderators and the counsellors which are online. We need to make sure that we reduce the stigma around mental health and don't try and make sure it doesn't increase. And also bear in mind there's a our duty of care to our staff. There are risks associated with toxic content, with mental health content, like depression, things like that. We just need to be mindful about how we go about our research and use of those models such that the staff are protected as well. So thank you very much. Happy to take any questions, and I think we'll stop it there.
Sure.
Thank you very, very much for a wonderful talk, please. A lot of applauses are coming in now.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot to take in from here. But now the floor is open for questions. You can send your question to the chat if you don't want to unmute yourself. Otherwise, just unmute yourself, raise your hand, and ask the question, whatever question you have for our speakers. And hopefully we will get the answers from them. Okay. Okay. Hunter.
Greetings. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Really some fantastic work that really is really moving. I'm calling from the Creative Computing Institute at the University of the Arts, just for context. I want to ask you two extremely difficult questions, so feel free to just say that's too big. But number one is, what were the challenges in there? I mean, when we publish, we need to produce narratives of success, how things went better and better. Maybe just between us, what maybe could you have done differently, or would you like to have done differently in the moment? And the second question is, what transferable best practices can you take that you want others, people like me, to take on board for our future projects in a similar space? Sorry, feel free to take a minute or two to think about them. I know.
Shall I take that one, Elena?
Yes, I can add one comment if you haven't thought about it, but you probably will. Okay, so the challenges, I mean, there are some practical challenges. So it's quite ethically challenging getting access to these data sets. We spent a lot of time working with COOF to get the data sharing agreement signed and sorted out. That took longer than we expected. So if you're planning a project like this yourself, give yourself enough time to get the data side sorted out.
We probably started at least 3 months late on working on the data, which is a little bit why we're kind of towards the end of the schedule rather than at the start. I guess for the take homes, the sort of lessons learned, I think the interdisciplinary working environment worked pretty well. So we've got an interesting team in that we've got researchers from Nottingham, Southampton, Pakistan. We've got one of our PDRAs, she technically a Southampton PDRA, but she's living in Pakistan. So there was very much, we had to be mindful around the kind of inclusivity of the team discussions and the way we went about the research. So we had we set up some virtual environments, document sharing, tried to make sure it's transparent and picking times where people could make, you know, factoring in childcare, that sort of thing. So there's a bit of kind of working in this interdisciplinary team, and then the actual running the experiments, and this is what we're going to do now. So we're kind of getting into that part where we actually run these. We're going to plan week-long experiments where we have kind of, this is where the interns will come in as well. So kind of get Koof in there, see what we can train for a week, and then kind of learn some lessons, do it again. From my past experience on the FloraGuard project and doing this in other projects, there's a bit of language you need to kind of communicate. So the different disciplines have different languages that they speak.
Yes.
Computer science, social science.
I can testify that.
Yeah. So there's a few things that come unexpected. Like I know my criminology co-I, she objects when I call things experiments. We have different ideas of what experiments are, for example. It's quite interesting. But that's part of it. As long as you have an open kind of friendly sort of way to do it, I think it does work quite well. You just need to give it enough time, I think. That's probably
and a lot of open communication.
Yep. So Elena, did I cover yours, or would you like?
Yes, definitely. I was just going to refer back to your last point that you made during the presentation regarding the toxic content. This is something that in addition to what you just mentioned, this is something that I would recommend to keep in mind, because as the one who within the team that has been collecting the interview data and analyzing them, I can definitely say that it reflects on you the toxicity of the content that you see. And even though I obviously took that into consideration, I realized pretty early that it was much more impactful than I had initially thought. But luckily, as Stuart was saying, the communication was pretty open and pretty flexible within the team. So that was very helpful in that regard as well. But that's something that I would definitely recommend to anyone who is deciding to focus on a similar research project.
Elena, if I could just add one more thing on that. This is actually that is a big issue on many different domains. I can give you some experience I've had working with partners in others. So I've worked with journalists before. So Deutsche Welle had a project with them. What they do is they have a kind of they prepare that, because they have a user content desk where they get anything thrown at them. So what they do is they give fixed time periods where they know they can steel themselves. I'm now going to work with social content, and I'm going to stop at this point. And they also have access to online counsellors and kind of people that they can talk to. The police forces, I've worked with National Crime Agency, they have a similar thing. You know, there's a lot of potential for burnout in the sorts of things that they're looking at. Obviously, criminal behaviour can be even worse. So again, it's kind of having clearly defined boundaries, having people you can refer to, being able to stop, say, I've had enough for today, I've got to do something else, and not having any pushback, you know, not having any criticism, say that's fine, another colleague can step in, or we just pause the thing. I think those help as well. I try to kind of suggest some of these to the team as we're doing our research.
You know, I was trying to cut in because the question we have in the chat is actually basically on that. Gloriana said, thank you very much for your interesting presentation about your innovative project. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of measures you put in place to protect your team members, the researchers who are working with the potentially distressing, which is a toxic data you mentioned? And I don't know if you have addressed that, but you've mentioned a few organizations that do something about it in some way. But maybe you have to let us know if you have, how you deal with that in your group as well.
I can tell you how we set the project up. So first of all, we had a policy of trying to have open conversations about it. So we before we started the analysis, we sat as a team and talked about the fact we're going to be dealing with this content, how we're going to go about it, and I, as sort of PI, explicitly saying it is okay to step out, take a pause, prepare yourself. If there are issues, talk about them. We'll find ways around that sort of thing. And then really it's a matter of we're trying to kind of just kind of compartment package up the data so it works in smaller chunks and try and deal with that, and just bring in generally just sort of talk about it. I try to create a friendly atmosphere where there was no shame in kind of saying, this is too much or it's a problem, there's this aspect, and just try to be as open as we can. Elena can say if that's worked.
Working in a team was very helpful within this because we weren't alone dealing with the data collection and analysis. So that was very helpful from my perspective, and also having the partners involved in the discussion, in this type of discussions as well, was also very helpful, because obviously they are professionally trying to deal with these highly toxic topics, and so they had very helpful suggestions, and they could support us in many different senses, including this one as well.
That's really interesting. Any other questions from anybody else? You can unmute your mic, like I said. While we wait for that, at the beginning, Stuart, Paul.
Oh, thanks, Ignatius. Thanks both. It was a really interesting talk. I'm going to have to watch it all again to make sure I try and get the most out of it. I had a question about the human understandable concept patterns that you talked about. So can you say a bit more about how you did that and how, if possible, you evaluated whether they were understandable? Who are you aiming at? Is it other people in the project team, Kooth team, the end users on the platform, or anybody in general? It's all about increasing trust, as you say, but how do you do that?
Yeah, so so in the literature, there are a variety of approaches. The one we're going to look at within what we're doing is kind of explanation-based training. So the idea is you have a deep learning model. Typically, it would have an attention layer. We're looking at things like transformer models, so they will have an attention layer. So it will be able to learn, given enough examples, where to pay attention in terms of which types of words it needs to look at within each input sentence. So what the explanation-based training does is it provides an opportunity to, as well as the input and just the output label, and you just train to kind of almost randomly attend and see eventually you via your loss function, it will work out where to attend better. You can provide an explanation in terms of the words which the human annotating that explanation says these words are important for the classification. So it's a subset of the actual data. And then what you can do is you can, in the loss function of your deep learning training, you can reward. You don't directly reward the model, because obviously in a real situation, in the infer mode, in the test mode, you will not have the explanation. But what you do during the training phase of the model, you can reward the any answer where the attention overlaps with the explanation. So if the attention is right, you kind of enhance the loss function. You reward that as a good thing, and penalize when it's not. So what you tend to do then is constrain the deep learning framework, in particular the attention weights which it learns, to focus on things that humans have said are important. That then, as an end result, tends to get models which are more likely to focus. If you run, say, an explainable AI approach to try to work out where is it attending to get its answers, you're more likely to get something which is based on the original explanation.
Right, and do you find that helps with explaining it to your partners in the project?
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. I mean, we're going to run the experiment in the next couple of months, but that's what we're hoping. So what you can do is you can plot things like the attention maps to show what it looks like. But it also, I guess, with the active learning and adversarial training, what we can do is we can, in addition to explanations, we're going to get a little bit of understanding developed anyway during the models, because they're going to be annotating the models. They're going to see where the models fail, because that's the type of posts that they're going to be asked to annotate. So we're hoping that that will develop just through the week of engaging with the different different disciplines in the team. That will help them develop an understanding of not just where the model's good, but where it's bad. And then they naturally will think about, okay, I see this model is good for this area, therefore I think in my day-to-day job, that is these are the cases I would want to use it. Whereas maybe for other cases I would not use it, but at least I now know that. You know, that's what we're hoping as an outcome.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So Fiona, you have a question. I don't know if you can raise your hand, just unmute yourself, and yeah, thank you.
Hi. So you can tell I'm not coming at this from an IT perspective because I couldn't even work out how to raise my hand. But my question is actually, so Kooth is the biggest provider of online forums in mental health. So it's obviously a really good example of a forum to look at. But I guess there are lots of other stakeholders offering forums and coming from really different perspectives. And there's a bit of debate between those about who decides what is good moderation, who decides what is risk and whether it should be managed in any particular way. So Kooth obviously have their own protocols and their own standards and their own philosophy about how that should be done. And I suppose my question is, have you thought about how generalizable that might be to forums that maybe are coming from a different perspective and might not agree with some of those underlying assumptions?
I can give an answer from a computer science point of view. So the methodology for the training and actually the annotation has been designed that it can be, you can kind of apply it to a different data set and then have slightly different labels developed. And our approach for Kooth and the exploitation in the discussions we've been having so far is that we would take the project itself would be like a proof of concept for this approach, and then we would develop a set of labels which are Kooth specific, so that works for that particular stakeholder, and then go through the process, this kind of annotation process. Essentially, we're automatically creating vocabularies, then annotating data automatically and using a check and correct protocol. And then we can train the models. So then, but you could do that same thing for a different forum, a different use case with slightly different data and different labels. But the actual process should work as successfully as long as the kind of the numbers of examples are similar and maybe the linguistic properties are not too divergent.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any other question? Okay, can we use the remaining minutes to thank our speakers again for this wonderful talk? And I will make everything available on YouTube, hopefully. So if you haven't if you haven't thought about what to ask now, you can ask later. Can people come back to you at any point, maybe
Sure.
emails and so on?
Yeah,
all right.
Happy.
Okay. Do we have access to these slides as well?
I can share them. They're
right.
marked public, so there's nothing in there that
Okay.
can't be shared. So I'll send you a PDF of them. I've
right.
also added in some of the references, so just to be helpful.
Okay. So thank you everyone for coming. This is a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it. All right.
Thank you for inviting us.
Elena. Thank you
Thank you
for
for having us.
Okay. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.